Um, all right, so the topic for tonight is, as I have named it, the Great Cornerstone Mystery. This all relates, does so much of what I ever do, relates to the second San Francisco Mint, the one at 5th and Mission Streets in San Francisco that is popularly known as the Old Mint, although it's old, but it's not the oldest. It's the oldest surviving in San Francisco anyway. So, first, a little background on that. My interest grew in the place when I was part of the San Francisco Museum and Historical Society, which was working for 12 years to try and turn that building into a museum. That ultimately failed, and the city evicted us. But in that time, I learned a great deal about the building. And I know Paul is one person who also had a lot to do with teaching me things about the building. But when I would give tours, there were certain things that I'd like to emphasize. And one of them was the whole issue of the cornerstone. So without further ado, okay. Why on earth do we have a mint in San Francisco to start with? As most people know, I hope everybody knows, that gold was discovered in early 1848 in the American River. And what followed was an influx of hundreds of thousands of people into California, particularly San Francisco. It certainly hastened along the process of California becoming a state in the United States, and this is just an example of how they got people here. This was from New York. So why do we need a mint in California? Back in 1852, when the Congress authorized a mint in San Francisco, this was the way the United States looked. There was a lot of open land between California and the rest of the continental US. And the minting facilities were located in 4 places. The main one in Philadelphia, plus Charlotte, Dahlonega, and New Orleans. Needless to say, by 1861, the C, D, and O mints were not operational for the US Mint anymore. And only the New Orleans Mint came back after the Civil War. But you can just see how far it is from San Francisco to the rest of the country. And getting the gold from California to one of these production facilities was it took a ridiculously long time and was really dangerous, because your choice was to go overland through basically undeveloped, in Western terms, land, or to take it on a ship and either go around Cape Horn or take it to Panama or Nicaragua, carry it across the isthmus, and then get on another ship. And none of those were particularly safe or of interest. So the situation in San Francisco and California in general was that there were private mints making gold and silver coins, such as the ones we see here, plus we used money from other countries, including Mexico. Spanish dollars and everything were still circulating, and they were treated as legal tender in the United States up until 1857. So the government wanted to get its fingers into the process, so establishing a mint in San Francisco seemed like the right thing to do. So the very first one was a building that had been a private mint before, and now I forgot the name of the company, but it's on Commercial Street. It was about a block and a half from Portsmouth Square, which was the center of town, and in theory, a half a block from the harbor. The water came up to Montgomery Street at that point, and this is between Montgomery and Kearny Streets. The facility was definitely inadequate. Here's a few pictures from the time, or drawings from the time of how things operated in the mint, like turning the gold into ingots and stamping it onto coins with those coin presses that look kind of familiar. But it was a remarkably productive facility. I don't believe it ever got robbed. There was an inside theft by a janitor whose job was to dispose of rats that plagued the building. So what he did was take a rat carcass, cut it open, put a few gold coins in, and then toss it out in the trash, where he would return later in the day and retrieve his ill-gotten gains. He was eventually caught. So after 1874, when the second San Francisco Mint opened, the building turned into a sub-treasury for a while. So there was still gold kept there in the vaults. In 1906, the top part of the building was completely destroyed, but the vault level remained and a few sort of surviving brick walls. This is a picture from the 1940s of the location when it was a private business. And that's pretty much what it looks like today, with the exception that there's a huge bank behind it. And in 1949, it became a California landmark. So that's that. The Mint, as I said, was a completely inadequate building, and someone who would have a stake in saying this did complain about it. The present building is a disgrace to the government and is so inconvenient, overcrowded, and unsuitable that I can find no language graphic enough to describe it, or strong enough to condemn those under whose management the building was purchased and converted into a mint. Those are the words of Albert Bolt Mullet, who coincidentally was the architect for the second San Francisco Mint. And there's an example of just how sort of crowded and unsuitable it was. The ladies sitting around in the adjusting room making the planchets the right weight. So in 1866, the government purchased property. They were originally, the old mint is shown as a red dot up in the upper corner of the map, and the next mint, this was a plot of land that they purchased in 1866. They paid $100,000 for it. It was actually for sale cheaper than that, but once the owner of the land discovered that it was the federal government that wanted it, the price went up. So in any case, in 1866, the land was taken over and the plans began for building the next mint. So here we're talking about after the Civil War and a period of time, what was going on in the country and San Francisco and California, incidentally. But there was a recession. There were frequent recessions because the country was on the gold standard. And so there was a fixed amount of money to be available. So from June of 1869 through December of 1870, there was a recession going on. It was all exacerbated by a gold panic in September of 1869. People had retained their Civil War habit of hoarding gold and silver because that was the only thing that was certain. And one of the most interesting things was the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869. Up until then, most things had to be imported to San Francisco or manufactured here. And this began, and in people's minds, was the beginning of bringing things from outside, and possibly prices would no longer be as high, so people would not make as much money. So these were the sort of economic conditions back in 1869 and 1870. Then, of course, before I can talk about a Cornerstone mystery, I have to talk about what the heck a Cornerstone is. Cornerstones are big in Masonic tradition. It is normally the first stone that's placed in the construction of a building. It's a big deal in public buildings in particular, but it could also be for any sort of large-scale construction. The cornerstone is important because it determines the placement and orientation of the building. It sort of says, okay, this is the beginning, the starting point. Traditionally, it was placed at the northeast corner of the site of the building. This follows a Masonic belief of, or rather a convention, that the north represents the dark and the east represents the light. And this was part of the constant interplay of dark and light, knowledge and ignorance, all sorts of things like that. By the 1870s, the placement of the cornerstone was much more symbolic. It wasn't necessarily the first stone placed, but and it wasn't necessarily exactly at the northeast corner, but there was still ceremonies and everything to mark the placement of the cornerstone. So when there was the placement of a cornerstone, there was an elaborate ceremony. There was a parade from the local Masonic lodge. They produced a commemorative trowel and hammer that were used to place the stone. It tended to be a full day of speeches and poetry readings and songs and frequently mementos. You can see over here a picture of a Masonic placement, actually the Nebraska Masonic Home's Mary C. Stapp wing. And there are our Masons with their aprons on, everybody looking official, and the heightening of the raising of the cornerstone. And below is a medallion from a cornerstone laying in Detroit in 1922. So it was a big deal. The other part about cornerstones is that there's frequently a copper or zinc box that's placed either in a hole at the top of the stone or underneath the stone, and that is called a casket. And the casket contains memorabilia from the time that the cornerstone was laid, not just the time, but the place. And once placed, they are not considered time capsules. They're not expected to be opened at a particular date. They are expected to remain in the building and part of the building until it is demolished. What we have on the right here is, once again, two Masons in their aprons opening a casket. I've now forgotten where that was, but you can see the copper box. It's been out there for a while. It's got all sorts of tarnish, and it's pretty well sealed. Someone is struggling with a crowbar to get it open. So the second San Francisco Mint was a significant public building, and so there was a ceremonial cornerstone ceremony. Yeah, ceremonial ceremony. And it just happens to have happened 125 years ago last month. So I wish I had remembered that or recalled that at all. I could have done this last month, but oh well. And this just sort of gives you an idea of the procession from the Masonic Temple. There's a band. There's the Knights Templar as the escort. There's the commander, Tyler, with a drawn sword, forged stewards with white rods, entered apprentices, etc., etc. They all head from the lodge to the site of the building, and presumably on May 25th, 1870, they made their way to the corner of 5th and Mission Streets and laid the cornerstone. So here's a view of the second mint being built. I do not have an exact year on this, but I'm going to say it's 1871 or so. And this is looking east from Mint Street. So on your right is Mission Street, and over at the northeast corner, you can see this sort of contraption that conceivably could have been used for the cornerstone. So it might have been, that might have been taken on the day the cornerstone was laid, which was not the first stone on the building, but it was quite ceremonial. I don't know seriously about that. So by November 5th, 1874, the second mint opened, and it was a state-of-the-art facility at the time. So, what coins were minted in San Francisco during the periods right before? Oh, I forgot to change the header on this. Okay, should be 1854 to 1869. But anyway, most of the precious metal denominations were minted in San Francisco, some many more than others. The base metal coins, the copper and nickel coins, the cents, the 3-cent nickel and the 5-cent nickel eventually, were all made in Philadelphia. That didn't change until 1908. Was that a question? Okay. Anyway, so they made most of the regular denominations. Here's an 1869 half dime. Here's an 1869 dime, an 1869 quarter dollar, an 1869 half dollar, and an 1870, oh, I really forgot to change this. Okay, 1872 dollar. Going on, let me just see. Well, 1869 $2.50 gold piece, an 1869 $5 gold piece, half eagle, an 1869 eagle, and an 1869 double eagle. And here, yes, this I forgot to update it. Okay, this shows everything from the last year before 1870 that these coins were minted in San Francisco. So the last dollar was done in 1859. The last $1 gold piece was in 1860. The last $3 gold piece was in 1860. Everything else was 1869. Yeah, okay, I forgot to do that. So this is how many of these were made during that time. They only started making the half dime in 1863, for example. They only made silver dollars in 1859. They only made $1 golds from 1856 to 1860, and $3 golds for a very short period of time. $3 golds were weird coins anyway. They were basically tied to the price of stamps. Stamps were 3 cents, and that allowed you to buy 100 stamps. So you can see the mintage numbers totaling over that period. The bulk were in $20 gold pieces in half dollars and quarters. Oh, and dimes, obviously, duh. Anyway, so that was sort of the pattern of production. Oh, yeah, this is the number that were actually made in 1869. I jiggered things at the end of the day, and I forgot to update my own notes on it. So here we go. So these were the ones, the mintages from 1869, the beginning of a recession. 1870, this is what things turned out to be. They made no half dimes, they made no quarters, they made no dollars, and they made considerably fewer of most other coins that year. The only thing that was increased was the $20 gold piece, the double eagle. Oops. However, okay, now that I've discussed what on earth was out there and what one can find, in the Cornerstone was placed, in addition to the usual newspaper clippings, the text of the speeches and poetry and all of that stuff, in the casket was placed one coin of every denomination manufactured in San Francisco in 1870 at the first San Francisco Mint, including the ones that were not regularly produced. So in the Cornerstone, there should be a half dime, a dime, a quarter, a half dollar, a dollar, a silver dollar, a gold dollar, a quarter eagle, a $3 gold, half eagle, eagle, and double eagle, all dated 1870. The ones that I've circled in purple were the ones that were not manufactured for general release. They were not minted. So the ones in the casket should be the only ones that there are. So again, the half dime, the quarter, the dollar, and the $3. So what about these coins do we know so far? Here's a picture of an actual 1870s silver dollar. They believe that 12 to 15 of them were made and 9 are currently known to exist. The first one showed up in 1914. And all of them appear to have been pocket pieces, meaning that they were kept in people's pockets, so they were worn as if they were circulated, but people didn't actually spend them. They just got sort of knocked around a lot. So the last 6 auction appearances of the sort of generally extremely fine condition coins ranged from $434,750 a few years ago to $805,000 in 2008. Certainly not pocket change. The record for this coin is a brilliant uncirculated coin that was not graded, that sold for over $1 million back in 2004. That's the one that is the most plentiful outside of the casket. The half dime. Only one has ever been seen. It didn't show up until 1978. And the last time it sold was 2004 for $661,000. And there is a picture of it. Thank you, PCGS. Yeah. Anyway, I get my acronyms confused today. The $3 gold. This was the first $3 coin with an estimate mark since 1860. There's only one that's been seen, and it's appeared in 1907. It appeared to have been used for jewelry. It too was kind of worn, but it's last sold for $687,000 back in 1982, and it is currently in the Bass Foundation collection. So don't ever expect to find this up for auction again. Finally, the quarter. Nobody has ever seen an 1870s quarter. So the Cornerstone example is definitively unique. Don't want to think about what it's worth if it were ever to be found. So this leaves us with 5 questions to my mind. First, is the casket still there? Second, are the contents of the casket intact? What is the condition of the coins in the casket? Where is this cornerstone anyway? Because if you go to there, you will not see what a cornerstone is. And will we ever recover the casket coins, and should we set about doing that? So I'm going to summarize my 5 answers to this. Is it still there? There's no reason to believe that it has been removed. The placement, if it is where it should be, it is under tons of granite and sandstone, and it would be very difficult to see how it could have been removed in the 150 years since it was placed. Are the contents intact? We don't, for the same reason, we don't think that there's any reason to believe that the contents have been tampered with. The known specimens of these coins can be explained as souvenirs, especially those silver dollars. That was the sort of thing that they would have handed out to dignitaries at the ceremony. Or just excess mintages, because it is extremely unlikely that they would have only struck one of each of those coins. They probably made 10 or 20 or whatever and took the very best to put in the casket, and the remainder were to be destroyed. And mint employees being mint employees, they maybe secreted 1 or 2 out. What is the condition of the coins that's in there? Obviously, since we can't see them, we don't know what it's like, what condition they're in. But many people would assume that they're in brilliant uncirculated condition, just as pure and beautiful as the day they were placed. But that doesn't really take into account the possibility of moisture intrusion. Water makes its way into odd places, or whatever else is in the casket. There's paper with sulfur in it, and there could have been destructive chemical reactions. We don't know what if they were placed in a velvet lined box in the casket, or just sort of tossed in there with everything else. So it's nice to assume that they're the best ever, but they may not be. Where is it? Where is this damn cornerstone anyway? It's unmarked. It may have never been marked, or whatever marking may have been lost when the 1906 earthquake happened. If there was a plaque on it, it fell off. If it was engraved, the old mint survived the 1906 fire, which I can talk about some other time, also at length. And the north side of the building, which was the closest to other buildings where the cornerstone would be, that was the side that got the most exterior damage. A lot of the sandstone exploded. There was a great deal of exterior damage to the building, and that may have caused whatever markings on the cornerstone there may have been to have been lost. Over the years, especially since people started talking about this again, a number of people have tried to go inside the building and go outside the building, use various imaging techniques, ultrasound and x-rays and everything else, and they came up with nothing. Not surprising, since at that level the granite blocks are 4 feet thick. They are reinforced with rebar, so that would not be necessarily an easy thing to find. And in any case, granite tends to contain a lot of radioactive material, so you're not going to necessarily find it that way. Will the casket ever be recovered, and should they be? Since we don't know where it is, the current answer obviously is no. Then if we ever do locate the casket, it becomes a matter of opinion. And in keeping with the Masonic ideal that these coins, this casket is part of the building, it is an integral part of the building, and it should not be removed until the building is demolished. So since the building is not being demolished anytime soon, the casket will stay there, and it should stay there. It's definitely part of the building. So there we go. There's our building after the federal government moved out, or actually after the mint moved out, and other Treasury officers were in there back in 1958. So that winds up the Great Cornerstone Mystery. This is one of the several installments that I did all at once a couple of years ago called The Secrets of the Old Mint. The other 2 installments, which who knows, I may reprise sometime, include The Secret of the Lost Tunnel and Hunting for Hidden Gold. And with that, I say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
now it's time for questions, if anybody has any questions.
Jason, have you ever been up to the quarry where they carried all of the stone for the mint?
I have not.
It's right on the, when you get off of 80 on Taylor Road, going to Rockland, about
Yeah, it's
to get into town. It's on the left-hand side.
It's Penryn. Penryn is the name of the town, and I can't remember the name of
Well,
the
actually, there's 2 quarries. The main quarry is actually just before you get to Rockland. Then when you go up the hill to Penryn, there's a smaller quarry on the right. Both of them have a sign on it saying that that's where the stone was quarried.
Okay.
But the one by Rockland is actually the one where most of the stone came from.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. I learned something every time. Wish I knew that 5 years ago when I was still giving tours. Just kidding.
I think it's a park now called Quarry Park in Rockland. The one in Penryn's just got a sign by it, and there's a building made out of the same stone sitting on the corner next to where the quarry was.
Okay. Other questions?
Jason, I have a question. Can you hear
Yes,
me?
Paul. Yes, I can.
Yeah. The book by Richard Kelly and Nancy Oliver called
Yeah, I know that book very well.
Yeah, I'm sure. They talk about this, of course, and about the cornerstone and the coins. But in reading it, it was unclear to me. They're kind of vague about how we know that they really did put all of those coins in the cornerstone? What do you know about what's the evidence that all these coins really were put in there?
Well, for all but the quarter, the fact that there are existing examples. That's one thing I could say.
No, that's not evidence that they put all of them in there.
Well, at least they made them, and if they made them, they would have put them in there. I mean, I believe there is documentation of it. I have not seen said documentation, but I take it on faith that the story is true. I'm usually suspicious of history because the second half is story, but you know, that would be a great Al Capone find if it turns out that there never were any in there.
Or maybe there are some in there, but maybe not all. And that's what I wonder, because the Kelly and Oliver book just is very vague about that and doesn't explain. They also kind of assume that they're all in there, but they don't really explain why.
Well, sometime offline we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Okay.
All right. Keep in mind that this is all being recorded.
Jason, I would respond to that a little bit.
Okay.
Keep in mind that at the time these coins were issued, or I should say, not say issued because they weren't put in circulation.
Right.
At the time they were minted, they had no premium value.
Right.
These coins, the 10-cent piece was worth 10 cents.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody pocketed one and walked out of the mint with it, it was worth 10 cents.
Right.
So this was not something where people had any ulterior motive in not putting it in there if that's what it was made for.
Right.
They may have struck extras as test pieces or to give out as souvenirs, but it's not like there was any extra value on these. These coins were worth face value at the time.
Right. Definitely. Definitely. I mean, presumably, though, people who knew that they weren't striking them for circulation would know that they would become valuable, but that's also still a time when when collectors in particular weren't paying very much attention to mint marks at all. So the fact that all mintage levels for 1870 were low in all of the branches, well, there were only two. Well, Carson City opened that year, so there was some overflow there. But yeah, but that's a good point. I mean, it's just, I think Paul's question was much more, how do we know that they even intended to put any in there?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And it's very much the sort of thing they would have done. So it's completely plausible. Whether it's for real, well, I don't expect I'll ever find out for sure.
Has anyone done a study of the die characteristics of the ones that were not released for circulation to know whether they were using old dies for at least the reverse? Because they must have had the die for the obverse.
Yes.
It has an 70 date on it.
Right. They must, yeah, they got, there was a part of the Oliver and Kelly book description talks about frantically getting the $3 die at the last possible minute, and maybe it didn't have a mint mark on it, except for the one that appeared does. But you know, everything else, yes, they admitted them the year before or within some period of time, so they had a reverse die that had the S mint mark on it, so they didn't need to get special new ones. It was only the dated side where they would have to have gotten special ones from back east, and those would have looked like any other. You know, there was nothing special about those either.
Jason, is there, excuse me, is there a notation as to which Masonic lodge participated, or if one did participate?
Oh, one definitely did, because they published the program for it.
So maybe it's in the archives of that lodge, what was placed in the casket.
That would be, yes. Ah, I have to call up my old friend Adam Kendall again to see if I can find out. I know that the current Grand Lodge of Northern California has the trowel, the ceremonial trowel, and because I've seen it. So
Archives are difficult questions given the 1906 fire, depending upon where they were located.
definitely, that's also very true.
Jason, did you see that trowel at the Masonic temple on California Street?
I don't know if it's exhibited, but they brought it to San Francisco History Expo for a couple years, and he brought it each of those times.
I had two questions, two points to make actually.
Okay.
One was about the mint on Commercial Street. That was the facility of Moffett and Company.
Okay.
And the federal government bought it. I want to say it was 90 feet square, on each side, and they expanded it to 120 feet on one side.
Okay.
Only the street side, and I featured it on a medal of the San Francisco Coin Club actually in 2004. Its 150th anniversary.
Yes.
And there are only two engravings known of the original building, because the building that's there at 608 Commercial Street now was built in the 1870s. They tore down
the original one,
and
then
they put the depository there.
Yeah, but what did remain was the vaults.
Yes. And your former colleagues are located there now.
They're technically my current colleagues again.
Okay.
But that's a whole different story.
And yes, and I would be anxious to go there and see what they have.
Oh, sure. When they reopen, definitely.
It was a museum that was associated with the bank, the Japanese bank, Sanwa,
Yes.
or something that owned it, and that was always fun because they had a rotating exhibit of Pacific Rim art.
Until the last 5 years or so, when they kind of gave up.
Well, there was a curator who had been the curator for a zillion years, and he retired.
Right. Well.
Presumably.
I know, and that is now the San Francisco Historical Society Museum, for whatever that counts as.
Well, they must
they have exhibits in right now.
For a lot.
Yeah,
Okay, well, thank you.
It's
Thank you, Paul. I just, I had my hopes up for the old mint rather than the old.
We all did.
Yeah.
My second comment was about the 1870 S $3 gold piece, and as you mentioned, that's in the Bass collection. But the Bass collection, which is extensive, or at least a fraction of it, most of it was sold, but a fraction of it, the best stuff, was kept and is on permanent or semi-permanent display at the ANA headquarters in Colorado Springs.
Okay.
And I have seen the coin. It's nondescript. It's, at best an EF.
Right.
They said it was been in jewelry. But there is a video hosted by Jeff Garrett, who at the time was, I think, president of the ANA, who it shows the Bass collection in great detail and focusing on the 1870s.
Okay.
So if people want to see that, all you got to do is go to money.org.
And poke
the ANA
around.
site on YouTube, actually, and you can find it.
That's a good video.
It is a good video. It's long, but
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I've seen the collection, and I wish that I had seen the video before I had seen the collection.